watching us. They say that ignorantly. They don't know. At least I hope they say it ignorantly. The dead does not get a news report of what's happening on earth after they die. As one text said, the dead knowing nothing. Now, with the rich man, somebody said, well, how do you explain that? Well, the rich man knew in Luke 16, when he talked to Father Abraham, he said, look, I have my brothers on earth. He had them, he says, and he wanted him to go back and warn them. Why did he want them to go back and warn them? Because they lived like he did, obviously. So he just wanted to warn them. And they had not arrived where he were, so he knew they were still there. But that's about it. He didn't have a clue about what was going on, in my view. Now, the tone of the book seems to indicate that it was written by Solomon in his later years. In his later years. When I was, after I was a younger man, beyond 40, and kids would say to me, see, Brother Benjamin, you're smiling there. You'll get there. Bless your heart. When I was a young man, after I got beyond 40, I would tell some people some things that they need to watch out for. They go like, you old fogey, what do you know? Let me tell you something. I said, I have already driven the highway that you're getting ready to put your car on. I said, pay attention to what I'm telling you. I said, it might keep you from having an accident. And that's similar to some things some old folks used to tell me. And some of my people that I used to hang out with, cousins, relatives, friends, and so forth, they would say, man, don't listen to the old man or old lady. Some of them are deceased now. But what I would say is, you know what, they might be right. Let me check it out. I'm not going to completely disregard it. And some of them are gone from drugs, bullet shells, and lived a life to a point to where they just smoked their way out, like a smoker or whatever case it is. Things have taken them away. But we have to pay attention to things that have happened with people who have gone on before us. It doesn't cost you anything to check it out. Because most things in life, calamities, when you do them, you can't undo it. So Solomon writes this book in later years, and as we will see when we get to the point, and he began to talk about, you have your hearing start going, and your teeth start falling out and grinding and all that kind of stuff. You say, oh yeah, he couldn't have known. He had to experience that. So we just keep on living. But anyway, the book ends with describing the whole duty of man. Now, in the survey of the book highlights several areas that Solomon supports his conclusion of life under the sun, and these areas will guide our study of the book. Other observations are welcome if you find them. Just bring them to class. As I tell you always, this is your Bible class. I'm just one of the guys standing up here. All right. Now, let's look at Ecclesiastes. Now, first of all, Ecclesiastes, the word there, come from I can't pronounce that word. I'm not even going to try. It comes from a word that means for one who addresses the assembly. And that's right in correlation with what Solomon does when he starts verse 1 of chapter 1. He said the words of the who? And when the who? The preacher. And the preacher usually addresses the who? The assembly, right? And then he also says, this is the son of David. And he also says king in Jerusalem. And then he says, vanities and vanities, saith the preacher. Vanities of vanities, all is vanities. He didn't say everything was bad. He just says vanities. In other words, it's futile. Doesn't lead to much. Doesn't lead to anything. So he goes down and he says, one generation passes away and another generation comes. But the earth abides forever. Now, some have said, well, how can Solomon write that? The earth is not going to abide forever because of 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10, and my memory is good. He says 2 Peter 3 verse 10 said the earth will roll away with a great noise, and burn up with fervent heat. Well, Solomon is not talking about the earth per se. When somebody said the whole earth, one time Paul wrote, so the whole earth is filled with malice or filled with something. What are we talking about there? We're talking about the P-E-A. I spell that wrong. See, I watched my memory. We're talking about the P-E-O. P-L-E. The earth. So the earth abides forever. People, he said, people are just here. Things pass away. And one generation, and we see this all the time, little babies coming, and some of us leaving. But the earth abides forever. He said the sun also arises, and the sun goes down and hastens to his place where he arose. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said, man, you know, this world is just changing. I said, where? He says, man, you don't see the world changing? I said, let me ask you a question. I said, does the sun still come up in the east and set in the west? Well, yeah. That hasn't changed. Do we still have 4 seasons in a year? In some places it may not seem like it. I said, well, that hasn't changed. Does the earth still rotate on its axis scientifically? He said, yes, well, that hasn't changed. Do we still have the same number of days in a year except leap year? He said, yes. I said, that hasn't changed. I said, what do you mean the world is changing? I said, we got a few knuckleheads trying to change our ideas. But the world itself, physically, has not changed. Yeah, temperature rises a few times and goes and could be cold in some places and so forth. And when people talk about climate change and et cetera, and I don't get into all that. That's a real good discussion. That's under the sun, but that's not our topic here with Solomon. But he says the sun arises and the sun goes down, hasten to his place where he arose. He said the wind goes toward the south and turns about into the north. It whirls about continually, and the wind returns again according to his circuits. Now, I didn't know anything about this when I was growing up. I had to go take a few classes, talk about the wind circuits and so forth, and hear the weatherman, et cetera, and so forth. But see, God controls that. And I didn't know how fast the world turned, but it turns real fast. You ought to look that up sometimes. Then he says in verse 7, all the rivers run into the sea. Did you know that? Yet the sea overflows. What? Not full. Okay, you got a good Bible then. He says, unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return. That's something that kids in the 6th grade study called the water cycle. Now, I was talking to somebody and they thought this was quite repulsive. And I said, you know what? Do you know that water you're drinking? Watch your cat. Don't let it out. Don't let the cat out the bag. Do you know that water you're drinking is old? What do you mean it's old? It always rains. I said, yeah, it rains all right. After it evaporates, then it condenses, then it rains again. There's nothing new under the sun. That's old water. And that old water been keeping us good. God made the oceans. And he has a way, if we got rid of that water cycle, but we really be in trouble. But that's little kids' classroom note there for you. He said, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. We can identify with that, can't we? Yeah, you can. Don't tell me you can't watch it. I'm going to show you that you can. How many people go on vacation every year? You don't have to raise your hand, but just think about it. Why do you go? I want to see something. Or I want to see somebody. How many of you go to the same place you've gone to before? Or go to the same place you've gone to before more than once? Somebody says, well, I have. Or why do you go back? You've already seen it once. Because your eye is not satisfied with seeing. You're not satisfied. Solomon knew something. Now, when we look at verses 4 through 7, notice, go back through that for just a minute. I want you to compare verses 4 through 7 with what he said in verse 8. Verse 4 through 7, he said, one generation passes away, another one comes, but he that abides forever, but the earth abides forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, hastens to his place. Waters, he said, the wind goes toward the south, turns unto the north. It whirls about continually, and the wind returns again according to his circuit. All the rivers run to the sea is not full. We know that happens. And the place from whence the rivers come, there they return. And then in verse 8, he says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. We ask ourselves a question. We acknowledge rather we can't hear it all and we can't see it all. Some of us have to hear it a lot. I told this story before. One class somewhere, it might have been here. When we were in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, I had this roommate of mine, and he would tell people, I'm not a Christian. He says, but I love working for a Christian. He said, because I know they're going to treat me right. And every time I went to my stateroom, he had this TV on. It was playing reports, the Desert Storm, Desert Shield was going on, the CNN, whatever it was. And sometimes when I got in there, he was playing the same stuff he played last hour. I said, Mark. Yeah, Robert. I said, look, can we, I'm on a break for about an hour here. I said, can we watch something else besides CNN? Well, man, I just want to keep up with the news. I said, telling you the same thing they told you last hour. Nothing's changed. You know what his problem was? He wasn't satisfied with seeing. He would see it over and over again, and he couldn't hear it enough. And he didn't know any more the next hour than he did the previous hour. All I wanted to do was for a change before I had to go back to work. But Solomon says in verse 9, the thing that has been, it what? It is what shall be. Now I don't do homework in here. I didn't bring in ask you to bring no paper and write down how many things you examine, that has been, that's going to be again. But you can think of a number of things. When people say, oh, child, we're doing this. Oh, man, please, people did that a long time ago. So we just wear different clothes and travel different ways, but we're still doing the same old thing. And that's why when Brother Benjamin preached last week about, I think it was last week, maybe the week before last, you can check me on this, about people needing the gospel for all situations. You need Jesus. The world needs Jesus. Sin hasn't changed. Yes, ma'am.
It makes me think about when I was a teenager, and I'm sorry. And my mother used to tell me certain things, and I think, oh, that was just back then. People are different now. But like I tell my children, the basic nature of people are the same, no matter 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years from now. You appreciate what you work harder or what's harder to get, and things that are easy to get. Sometimes you don't think as much about it and things like that. So just the basic nature of people are the same.
Thank you, sister. Anybody else? But that's very true. People still, I'll give you an example. People still look at people and go like, what, I don't like you. Oh, why you don't like me? You don't look like me. Oh, I don't like you. Why you don't like me? Your foot is smaller than mine. I wish my foot was that small. Silly stuff. Oh, I don't like you. Why you don't like me? Your skin ain't the same as mine. Silly stuff. You just happen to live in a different house than I live in, that's all. Think about that. Yes, sir.
These days, seem different than the old days from my perspective, because used to be people knew each other and you could pretty much go to bed and not necessarily have to lock your door. Now, we didn't try that because we were not in the experimentation mode, but for me, from my perspective, I think things are getting worse because evil is acceptable. The more homosexuality moves into the world now, the more it seems to be accepted. And it seems like the world wants you to accept it as natural. But the devil is a liar. Simple as that.
Thank you, Charles. But in regards to that, when people talk about, how people adopt and practice deviant things like homosexuality and so forth and things of this nature, Paul's preaching about that from Romans 1. 2,000 years, he was preaching about it in Romans 1. God warned against it in Deuteronomy and Leviticus way back then. So all folks have done is say, look, I can't cook that pot in this kitchen. I'm just going to move to another kitchen and cook that pot. But it hasn't changed. Men and women still defy God. And if you trace it all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when the devil came to that lady and says, y'all know who the lady is. Did God tell you not to eat from that tree? Yes, he told us we could eat from every tree in the garden except this one. Oh, you little girl, let me tell you something. He's trying to put a hoodoo on you. He's trying to fool you. Look, he just knows that if you eat from that tree, you're going to be smart like him. He knows this. He's holding out on you. She was not informed. She was deceived. And it's the same thing goes on today. Folks are not being informed. They're being deceived. Let me pass something by you here. Any of y'all have seen your birth certificate? Well, if you're going on cruises, you had to show your birth certificate, right? So you've seen your birth certificate. Now, on that birth certificate either says, bear with me in my foolishness or in my folly. That birth certificate either says male, female, transgender, LBT, whatever. What? Are you kidding me? Yes, ma'am.
Also, certain forms that say sex assigned at birth. So it don't matter what you are now, they want to know what you were born as.
But I like the text where it says God made them male and female. That God made them. And you know what? That's when Solomon says everything still stays the same. I don't care how many scalpels you get or whatever you do, you're not going to be able to change that. Not going to be able to change it. You get somebody to echo it. JJ.
Let me just build on something that Charles commented on about locking the door. And it's interesting because that's an excellent comment that shows the cycle of life that Solomon actually talked about. And when we think about that and then go back in the scripture and look for examples, it made me think about Lot when he was living in Sodom and Gomorrah. I think he locked his door at night, And so we see the cycle. There's others who you can look at what was going on in the life of the individual, but Solomon's words still ring true. The principle that he talks about here is true.
You think about it, thank you, JJ. People didn't just wake up one day and decide, you know what, oops, I need to lock my door. They didn't wake up one day and just decide, you know what, those people leave their door open. So what we need to do is, that's an opportune time for us to go in there and steal some stuff. Listen. You know where that comes from? That's come from children not being brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. See, because when I was brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, look, I don't care what you did. It was about what I did. Here's the situation. I know the bell gonna get me in a few minutes. I was in the Navy. I was a young seaman, and some of you don't know what the seaman is. Seaman in the Navy, E3. I don't know what they call it in the Army. But anyway, same thing. E3 equivalent. I was E3, and I got out one morning while we ran in there to take a shower, and this kid left his locker open. And we had just got paid our $68 that we got every 2 weeks. Yeah, y'all know anything about that. Mine was 1970, brother. One brother told me the other night about $45 every 2 weeks. I said, oh my goodness. All right, listen. He told me about that. He had his $68. He had just got paid. And I saw his locker, and the guy said, hey, Smitty. I said, yeah. He said, look, man. He said, man, we get this, we can split it. I said, no. Not me. Come on, man. I thought we was buddies. I said, not me. And my mama told me, don't steal. Man, he won't know it. I said, I'll know it. He said, all right, you go ahead. So I stood right there beside his rack. We call it a rack because we were three beds. Stood right beside his rack. When he came out, I said, man, let me tell you something. He said, what? I said, boy, you almost lost your paycheck. Because those days they didn't pay us in check, they paid us in dollars. They counted it out. So I says, he said, oh man, I was planning to go home this weekend too. That would have messed me up. I said, man, you need to lock your locker. And the other guy told me, man, I thought we was tight. I can't hang with you no more. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But see, where did I get it from? Because my mama did something to me one time, and I probably told this to somebody before. There was a man in my neighborhood that had a nice pear tree. And there was nice pears growing on that tree. And in Mississippi, those pears grow big. You ever see a big pear, you go to Mississippi. I watched that pear. And one day I thought that pear was just right for plucking. And I plucked that pear and turned to run. And when I looked back to make sure nobody saw me, guess who saw me? My mama. She was standing in the window ironing her clothes. And all she did was she shook her hand and says, I'm going to whip you. She said, I'm going to whip you. And when she came home, she said, get the switch. If you don't get the right one, you don't want me to get one. Y'all don't know anything about that. I got the switch. And let me tell you what. She says, take off your pants. I ain't whipping no clothes out of the bottom clothes. And you know what? In terms of old folk stuff, she tore my behind up. And every time she whipped me, she was saying over and over, I told you not to steal. I'm trying to keep you out of jail. I told you not to steal. And you know what? I was 10 years old. And I'm going to tell you what. I never stole another thing. And anybody who was talking about stealing, I disassociated myself with them. Because the book says, train up a child. And she would always read this to me. Train up a child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he won't depart from it. Yes, sir. Charles, I'm not messing with that. I'm not going to touch that. I don't have an answer for that. But I do have an answer to the fact that the reason why we run rampant the way we do and kids run rampant the way they do is because they lack some home training and reinforcement. Yes, sir.
Jail timeout?
I don't know if jail is timeout or not. I hadn't thought of it that way. That could be. Sometimes that's longer than timeout.
That's time in.
That's time off. All right, look. Time out for adults. So let me end with this. Solomon says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with seeing. Is that which has been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done, which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. I quit. The bell should have rang. It did. I didn't hear it. So we'll pick up there next week talking about this particular topic. And listen, if you didn't get a handout, we talk about the vanity of life. Solomon's talking about, basically we talk about now is why there's vanity in life, and that's covered in verses 1 through 18 of chapter 1. So if you didn't get a sheet, see somebody and they'll make you a copy. I made 40. I didn't make it more. Thank you for your time and your attention.